Hello and welcome to the first of our podcasts for Equine Health Week 2024. Today we're talking about equine wellbeing and why it's important to use an all-round approach in keeping our horses fit, well and, of course, most importantly, happy. To delve into this topic, I'm joined by two world-leading practitioners from our world-class programme, which is funded by UK Sport and the National Lottery. So first of all, I'm joined by Ben Benson, who's the farrier for our Podium Potential Pathway programme. He's a master farrier specialising in remedial and performance farriery and has been the official farrier at 3 Olympic Games and the recent Asian Games. Hello, Ben.
Hi.
And I'm also joined by Mark Fisher, who is the saddler for the World Class programme. He works across the disciplines and has travelled to numerous championships, including the recent European Championship at Riesenbeck. Welcome, Mark.
Hello.
So probably the first thing to kick off with is what actually does equine wellness mean to you? That's our topic for today.
Age before beauty. You tell me what you think, Mark.
Equine wellness. There's an awful lot of talk at the moment, isn't there, about the social licence to operate and the obviously the wellness, the well-being of the horses. So certainly, as far as my job is concerned, with the saddlery and the tack, it can have a huge impact on the performance and the welfare of the horse, and also the safety and welfare of the rider.
Yeah, I think for me, I think we are very mindful at the moment. Equine sport is very much in the forefront of everyone, and ethicality and all those things come to play. So I think equine wellness for me is about making sure that the horse is kept not only at its optimum for its job, but actually is happy, is healthy, and we're doing as much as we can to kind of limit the effect of what we're doing with the horse. Horses have a job to do, just like I have a job to do, and my job has a negative effect on my body and my back, but I manage it, so therefore it's okay, and I'm not putting pressure on myself that I can't do. And I think it's realising that animals are the same. So for me, equine wellness is making sure that the horses that are involved in the sport and that are working, I'm doing everything I can to make sure that not only their feet are kept to the best and highest standard that they can, but we're managing them for the long term and making sure that the soundness is always maintained, so that the horse is asked to do the job, but it's as pain-free and as happy doing its job as it can be.
And I guess we'll sort of delve into this a bit further later on, but it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, is it, to keeping our horses sort of happy and healthy? You have to be very bespoke, I guess is the word, to the approaches that you're using.
Very much so. We all look at the three of us here today. We all know what we're doing. If we all look down at our shoes, we're all wearing 3 different types of shoes. So, in our own life, we realise the value of the small tweak of, if I'm going to be on my feet all day inside, I can wear those shoes and they'll keep me comfortable. Whereas if I'm outside in the mud, schlepping around Burley in the wet, then I need those sorts of shoes. And I think when we look at that, and then we apply it to horses, actually it's the same. Certain horses, certain conformations have certain different characteristics which suit certain outcomes and packages. So it's making sure and recognising when something's different. You have it within saddlery. When you go jumping, you need a jump saddle, and when you do dressage, you need a dressage saddle, and the effect that the mechanics of that saddle has on the rider and your stability. And it's the same with shoes. What I put on a dressage horse and a show jumper or an eventer will all have a different impact. So recognising that and highlighting it and doing it when you need to.
Yeah, it's every combination, every horse rider combination that you work with are individuals. You have to treat them all as individuals, whatever level they're competing at or riding at, from a happy hacker up to any of our elite athletes. It's about assessing the horse and rider combination, isn't it, and seeing what's best for the individuals. Especially
when the horse is working at such a high level. I talk about this a lot, and 5 things at 3% to 15%. 3% on its own is negligible. You can argue you can't see it, you can't feel it, but it would be a positive. And when you add that together, that's where you get your gain. And, as I said, even just the little things we know in our shoes and socks will make us sore at the end of the day. It's no different for that horse working at the highest level or coming into a fence on a certain angle. It needs to know that its saddle and its feet are where it needs it to be, and to be comfortable, especially when it gets to the other side of the fence. Because if it starts thinking about it on the takeoff, I'm not going to be comfortable on the other side, it's going to become guarded, isn't it? So all these little things have such an impact.
And let's focus in on the feet then for a minute, Ben. So talk me through some of the signs people should be looking for that their horse's feet are healthy, or on the opposite side of things, maybe unhealthy.
Okay, so as a rule, the first thing, obviously, we all tend to dial in straight on the horse's feet, but sometimes not stand back and look at, are those horse's feet the right feet for that horse? So it's kind of understanding the context of it. As a general rule of thumb, when you stand side onto the horse, we look at the angle of its pastern. That should be the angle of its hoof wall. Those two lines should be parallel or in line. And then what you're looking at is that line should be parallel to the angle of the horse's shoulder. So effectively, that sets you up for, it's called hoof pastern axis, HPA, that the HPA is correct. And when you look at the hind foot, what we'd want to see is that the coronary band of the hind foot, if you drew a line from the heel to the toe, again stood side on, if you project that forward, that should hit the back of the horse's knee on the front leg. Then you know that those feet are nice and square to the horse's body and square to the ground, so all the bones should be at a better angle. And then when we stand in front of the horse and look at his or her front leg, we draw an imaginary line down through the middle of the leg, through the middle of the knee, the middle of the fetlock, and the foot should sit symmetrically either side of that. So just checking that the basics, that the foot's in the right place, is really important. When we pick the foot up, we want to see that it's a really nice balanced shape. You know, not always that one foot might be exactly the same as the other side, but they want to be similar in proportion. And we want to make sure that, again, if we drew a line down the middle of the frog, that there's 50% on either side of that line, as a rule of thumb. We'd want to see that there's really strong heels, that they're not crumbly and they're not underrun, and that the frog's a nice shape, and again, symmetrical, nice and fleshy and healthy. And we're looking at the horn quality. So you want to make sure that the horn quality is really nice and strong, and it's not dry, brittle, it's not crumbly, it doesn't flake off or bits come off so it looks a bit like wet cardboard underneath. That's where you show that you might have a bit of a fungal infection or something like that. So horn quality is really important. And then the signs of unhealthy feet, obviously poor conformation will lead to poor hoof shape. And that in itself then gives loading problems. So if you have a horse with foot balance issues or pathologies that come like side bone, corns, navicular, all those things tend to bring changes in foot shape with them. So it's about managing them and making sure that those changes in foot shape don't make it worse. We make sure obviously our toes are the right length proportionally. As a rule of thumb, the toe should be 3 times the length of the heel. If you're about there, you're about the right sort of proportion. Again, with horses, just like people, there's no one measurement. It's not a formula, but there is a proportion in nature. Everything is about proportion. So making sure that proportions look normal. One of the other signs that you might have a bit unhealthy foot is your horse might not actually be growing much foot. They're the sort of horses that generally have quite a lot of compression in their heels, where the farrier might say there's nowhere for him to put new nails, or if the heels aren't really growing, there can be a lot of pressure in the feet, bruising. Again, that's a sign that there might be a bit of an imbalance. Crumbling walls and thrushy frogs. Again, sometimes there can be externally an external reason, so like the environment or things like that, but also it can sometimes be that actually that horse could need a bit of a hoof supplement. We talk about different environments can affect feet differently, so sometimes thrush could be a bit of a dirty bed or something like that, or it actually might be that there is a bit of a fungal infection that is in there that is not being dealt with, and crumbling walls and things like that. That also might be a bit of a highlighter that the horse has a bit of a nutritional issue. Mm-hmm. So, can be a bit anything from a gut imbalance to as simple as just some elements that actually are missing from its diet. And cracks or splits, they're other indicators that there's a bit of an imbalance in loading, or the feet might be a bit long. As a general rule of thumb, your horse should grow every day a piece of paper thickness of horn. So 28, 35 days, your foot should be about a magazine thickness of hoof to come off. And if it's anything sort of less than that, then that shows that you might find that actually there might be a bit of an imbalance in the horse's diet, so it's not growing as much as it could do. And equally, the thing to remember is if your horse has grown 35 pages of thickness of growth, that's extra leverage on the feet. and there was a lady called Professor Bernard Sawella that used to work with the programme quite a lot before she went to Canada. And in one of her studies, she said for every 1 centimetre of foot that is too much out of balance for that horse's foot, it's the equivalent of 50 kilos of weight on its back. So it's really important to make sure that with unhealthy feet, or feet that have not the best foot balance, that you keep them as balanced as you can, because that will have an implication on the horse's body.
So one of the things you mentioned there was environment and the effects that can have on a horse's feet. And we're recording this in January. It's very wet. It's very muddy out there. Yeah. What effect might those conditions have on a horse's feet?
Okay, this sort of winter weather can be quite detrimental to a lot of horses. There's a number of factors. So firstly, it was actually when the Romans came to Northern Europe where they realised they had to do something about their horses, and that's where predominantly shoeing started, because ultimately feet were getting very wet, then very dry. Horses' feet can cope when they're very wet for a long time or they're very dry for a long time, but when they fluctuate between the two, that's where you get your instability. And hoof wall, when it's over waterlogged, can be as much as 90% less tensile strength in the wall. So it goes a bit like the horn tubules behave a bit like wet toilet roll, how it effectively breaks down the glue and then it becomes quite strung out. So managing horses' feet is really, really important in this environment. And wet feet can be as much as 1/4 of an inch wider than they are when they're dry. So if you think of what that does, that fluctuation in size, so keeping the horse's feet as consistent as you can is crucial. The other thing that you get in a lot of wet environment like this now is feet can be really washed out, depending on the soil types that we have. If you think about it, it can be a bit like wet sandpaper. So you've constantly got this mud running over the sole and down the side of the frog. So actually you can find sometimes feet can be quite sore. The other thing as well is that with the moisture that gets in, as we bring those horses in and we wash them off again and we put them in on rubber mats, sometimes we find that those feet never actually get a chance to properly dry out. We all understand what this weather does to our best boots, so we never wear that on the yard. Or when your feet or your boots are a bit wet, and if you go into a dirty stable, they'll suddenly suck in all the ammonia from the bed. It's exactly the same with horn tubule. So horn tubule is modified skin, so therefore it too, when it's wet, will absorb what it is in. So you find sometimes actually feet can become more susceptible to fungal infection when they're really, really wet than they do when they're dry, because that moisture is such a carrier of the two. So trying to make sure that the feet are picked out, trying to make sure that they're given a chance to dry out, and more importantly, it's making sure that you get in with your hoof pick and make sure there's no stones or any mud or anything that's left on the feet, because quite often that mud, when it sits on the hoof wall, will not only carry moisture into the wall, but when it dries out, it wicks it out, so it can exaggerate the drying process. And certainly for horses that are shod, that have nails, as that hoof wall around it shrinks, it can leave clenches become more risen. So sometimes you might feel that actually your clenches pop up more, or your shoes might move a little bit more. So a really good topical horn dressing is really important for a lot of these feet. So put that on before they get wet, and you can almost feel like you can sort of semi-waterproof the feet.
And then so bringing feet back to the sort of whole horse approach that we're looking at, can the condition of your horse's feet tell you more about his overall well-being and the bigger picture maybe?
Absolutely. There's a lot of little indicators that once you start looking, you start joining the dots up together. But if you're not careful, just again, going back to that thing of stopping at the coronary band, sometimes they can be quite detached and you don't notice the differences between stuff. So, for example, irregular foot shapes quite often will show an irregular limb loading from that horse. So if his foot turns in or it turns out, it can also be indicating in the horse's body. Instability, so tripping, and what's really interesting is sometimes people mistake stumbling for tripping. So you might find, again, that might come back to irregular foot shapes. Toe drag's a really interesting one. A lot of horses, when they've got a problem higher up, will square the toe off their shoe, or you might see their hoof wall, if you stand side on and take a picture of it with your phone so it's dead flat against the ground, and you can really see the angle of the hoof wall. Then sometimes if you see that hind toe, if it's not a true parallel line running down the dorsal wall of the toe, quite often that can indicate that there's something going on and the horse is overloading his heels, or his toe might be a bit long for him. tapping. So sometimes when that horse trots away, instead of his foot stepping up, he might tap his toe on the floor. Again, that can show with instability in the hind leg. And I know from working with Mark in the past on some horses that instability in a hind leg can quite often mirror other things in the horse's body, so a bit of saddle instability. And then the other thing is obviously bruising and cracks and splits. They could highlight that the horse might be shifting its loading pattern in order to accommodate something. So quite often it's really important as a farrier to have those conversations with the rider or the horse owner to say, how's the horse going at the moment? Because the other thing as well is the vet might only flex that horse's leg once or twice a year, or only if there's a problem. But as a farrier, I'm flexing that leg exactly the same for probably 15 minutes each time I shoe it. So I tend to feel the horse uncomfortable in certain positions, or it doesn't like being lifted up so much. So sometimes we can sort of see the first wave of the problem, we can feel it, and we're seeing the shoe wear that's suddenly turned up. So sometimes it might not necessarily be something the farrier's caused or the farrier, can fix, but it might be something we end up having to accommodate because it's got a sore back or something like that.
And that leads us quite nicely on then to the saddlery side of things, Mark. What impact then does sort of equipment and saddlery have in horse well-being?
Yeah, so obviously ill-fitting tack or saddlery equipment that we use on the horse can have a huge effect on the well-being. If it's not fitting correctly, pinching too wide, too narrow, throwing the saddle out of balance, therefore the rider is going to be out of balance and unstable. And likewise with the bridles and the bitting, which really highlights the importance of having tack, saddles, bridles, bits checked on a regular basis. Society Master Saddlers would recommend 2 to 3 times a year, depending on what we're up to and how much the horse is likely to change. Obviously, older horses and younger horses might need more regular attention. Horses in heavy competition work, and likewise horses that are just hacking out and enjoying life in that way with their owners. But of course, they're affected by the grass in the spring, getting wider, often fatter, which of course affects the fit of the saddle, etc. So, and if the saddle and the bridle, a bit, etc., the equipment that we use, the tack that we use fits correctly, then of course, on the other hand, it can have a huge positive effect on the horse's longevity and how long it can enjoy life working with us, and whether it's again just hacking or competing at top level.
And what are some of the signs that something might be going wrong or the fit isn't quite right?
Yeah, some of these things can creep in quite slowly. So a horse changing shape, maybe fitting up and becoming a little bit narrow, more toned, or softening up because it's been out of work a little bit and therefore getting a little bit wider, will of course affect the fit of the saddle. Too wide, the saddle tends to drop at the front and can restrict the horse's forelimb. Too narrow, can be lifted at the front and then tip back and have more of an effect towards the rear of the saddle, the horse's lumbar, etc. So likely to affect the back end of the horse. The horse is pushed from behind. But what we tend to find is these tend to creep in gradually. And so riders don't tend to detect them very quickly because it's such a gradual change until maybe it's picked up by the equine, practitioners, the vet, or the chiro, the physio, the osteo, etc., the equine massage sort of picking up a problem. By then it's a little bit late really, which is again brings it back, highlights the importance of regular checks by a suitably qualified practitioner, saddle fitter, bridle fitter, to try and find these problems before they become too much of an issue. And we often find, as we have here today, we're working with the world-class athletes, is again, when the saddles aren't quite right, the riders aren't always aware of that until we make the change. And then when we rebalance it and just give it a little bit of a lift at the front or the back or laterally, and immediately the rider gets on board and they go, oh, crikey, that feels better. And of course, the horse feels that as well. They get irritated by a fly, don't they? So a saddle or a bridle not being quite right, a bit being too high or too low, too narrow, too wide, etc. All of these things have a huge effect on the animals.
And I suppose as well, it's important that not only does that saddle or whatever fit the horse, it's also got to fit the rider as well. Is that right?
Absolutely. We get a lot of riders that turn up for a new saddle and they'll say, as long as it fits the horse. You know, the horse is so important, it's got to fit the horse, but it's a 50-50. It's absolutely imperative that the saddle is suitable for the rider as well, because if we just paid all our attention on fitting the horse, and then the saddle is too big, too small, the seat is the wrong shape, or the flap is the wrong shape, the wrong length, the blocks are in the wrong place, then of course the rider isn't then effective or stable. They could be tipped forwards, backwards, over to one side, their legs aren't secure, and they become a lot less effective as a rider, and of course that has the knock-on effect then to the horse. Likewise, if we give the rider the right support in the saddle and they're safe and secure, you know, a nervous rider can really come on quite quickly because they're feeling a lot happier, a lot more secure, and that goes down the rein, doesn't it, to the horse. And the horse, generally, we would find what suits the rider, providing it's the correct fit for the horse. You know, we tend to find that the horse and rider choose the same saddle in many cases, because if we get the rider more stable and more confident, they become more effective as a rider, and then obviously the horse reacts accordingly. If we've got the rider in an unsuitable saddle that's too big, too small, just doesn't suit them and doesn't support them correctly, then they become less effective as a rider, and obviously less effective as far as the horse is concerned as well. And one thing we have learned, especially working with the elite athletes over the years, is a horse really benefits from stability. And the platform that the rider is sat on, talking about the saddle, if we get that saddle straight and level and stable, then obviously the rider becomes stable and a lot more effective in turn, which then goes down through the saddle and the rein to the horse. When we're considering a suitable saddle for the horse and rider, is a saddle fitter would sort of consider the bottom half of the saddle for the horse and the top half of the saddle for the rider, if you like, and we can obviously mix and match with different trees and different seats and different flaps and the angle of the flaps and where the stirrup bar is placed, and the girthing arrangement for the horse, where the blocks are placed for the rider, or even the softness or the firmness of the seat, the shape of the seat. So we have the ability these days, especially with the UK-based manufacturers, to work very closely with them, and it's not that a bespoke saddle becomes any more expensive necessarily. It's just saddles are made in a factory, in a workshop, and if we have the right input, then we can sort of order the saddle up specifically for that horse and rider, knowing that the seat and the flaps and where the blocks are placed suit the rider, but obviously the underside of the tree, the framework in the saddle and the panel, and the girthing arrangement has got to be suitable for the horse as well. So gone are the days really of buying saddles off the shelf, and just we do have that ability, especially with the UK-based manufacturers, to have saddles made up specifically to suit the horse and rider, and again with a lot more adjustability and adaptability in them now, isn't there, with the changeable gullet plate systems and panels that we can alter, and girthing arrangements, girth straps that we can move around to suit the horse, because we accept that the riders can change, they can put a bit of weight on, they can lose it. We're just coming out of Christmas, aren't we? And we would sometimes see the odd rider early in the year that's put a little bit of weight on over Christmas, and maybe finding the seat a little bit snug at the moment. Likewise, the horses can change enormously. Very fit event-type horses or competition horses will be let down maybe a little bit over Christmas, and then they'll trim up and tone up, become a little bit narrower perhaps, and then other horses that through the season put weight on, drop off through the winter and put weight on when we get onto the spring grass. So all of these changes that we accept, but just highlights the importance of having the equipment, the tack checked on a regular basis.
And we've sort of touched on it a bit in the answers that you've both been giving so far, but I mean, we're here at a P3 squad camp where it's a very holistic approach to looking at a horse and a rider and assessing their needs. Why do you think that approach is really important when it comes to making sure that our horses are, I mean, we've said it several times, happy and healthy and able to perform at their best?
I think from my side of it with the saddle fitting is, today we've seen a couple of saddles that have been quite unstable. They've actually fitted the horses nicely. So where does that instability come from? If I'm working with my own clients, I'm trying to work all of this out, whereas with the programme, it's fantastic, isn't it, to be able to work with all the other practitioners in the arena at the same time. So we've got Ben, the farrier, we've got the vet, we've got the human physio, we've got the equine physio, we've got the strength and conditioning, and the coaches all there together reviewing these horses and rider combinations. And so we can answer why is this saddle doing this. I can say why, but if the saddle fits, but it is still moving too much in one direction or slipping back, and the horse is having an effect, or the rider is having an effect, we've got all the experts in the arena at the same time to help with that. And a lot of our private clients say, well, that's okay, that's fine, because obviously they're world-class elite riders and they're well funded. But we can do the same with our private clients, with our happy hackers and riders at any level, because they will be getting the vet, they will be getting the farrier, they will be getting the their equine back worker in, and their coach, and it is a case sometimes where we need to come together to work through these problems and flag up and work out where the issue is coming from. Is it the rider? Is it the horse? Is it the saddle? But you have to have those conversations, don't you, to work those through.
Yeah, and I think the hard bit is there is that strength in the team, and ultimately, whatever analogy you want to use, it's like building the cake, the pie. We're all a slice of it, and if one area is missing, then there's a potential to fall through that gap. And I think I think of examples that we've seen on the programme, and I've seen with my own clients. I've gone to look at horses that were lame, and you get there and you look at them and they're not lame through pain, they're unlevel. So that's the first thing, is making sure the horse is sound. Yes, it is sound, it's unlevel. Mechanically, it's unlevel. And then you watch the horse being ridden, and as a farrier, they're all staring at this horse's foot saying, well, why is it favouring that leg? Why is it struggling? And actually, as the rider came down the long side, I stare at the rider and I look at her knees, and then as I look down, we've got 1 foot 3 inches lower than the other one, and you think, well, hang on a minute, all her weight's going down through that left foot. No wonder the horse is struggling and labouring on that one leg. So that's where it is. So, there's a great example of me. I'm just a farrier, but yet realising that there's a saddlery issue or there's a rider issue. And I think the one thing that's really powerful is that when you come here, and at the end of the day, I think you have to have the right mindset for this. Sometimes it can be seen as a criticism, which it's not, but it is that point of, if you truly want to understand how you can enable or make your horse happier, how you can make sure that your horse is as sound as possible, and then you're not doing anything to the detriment, having all the people that have an effect on your horse, having them at some point work collectively is so powerful, because I might realise that actually I want to change the feet, but when I talk to the physio says, well, actually we're struggling with this injury here and that injury there, and we really don't want any more pressure on that, so we need you to leave that alone. So that's the other thing, is sometimes knowing not what to change. But from a farrier perspective, most riders don't generally have the same conversation with their farrier that they would have with their physio and their trainer about what the horse is struggling with. We've had horses in the programme before that consistently have an issue. So you might hear the trainer or the rider say they're very lazy with their hind legs, or lazy on one leg. Well, it's not lazy, it's unstable, which is why the horse can't push off that, which is why it's favouring the other side, which might be the result of why you always have a pole down on a double or a triple on one rein, because the horse can hold itself in that position for 1 or 2 fences, but the third, or that combination, is just enough to highlight it. And I know we've had before where there hasn't been any other noticeable issue, and as the trainer's sort of going into, well, we need to set up like this, I've picked up hind feet, and you notice that actually that horse's foot is grown in quite a different angle, or conformationally that foot is twisted compared to the other leg. So actually the horse needs to be shod a little bit differently. And then suddenly when you point it out, everyone can see, well, actually, no wonder that horse comes in and wants to try and change its rein before it goes into a fence, because that's how it can cope. Whereas actually by shoeing it, you create that stability, so the horse is much better, canter pirouette to the right, to the left. The instability that you can have sometimes, and you can enable with just the mechanics of shoeing, you can add good mechanics to aid the poor mechanics, just like with the saddlery. So it's so powerful when you get round in that group, because ultimately you'll find actually you all see the same thing but from a different perspective. And the power in the marginal gain is you don't have to change one thing massively, but actually you can, and it doesn't have to be expensive, but as all being there and being part of it, that's where you spot the problem, and it's always prehab's cheaper than rehab. So being able to address that issue before it's a problem is quite often a small, insignificant tweak, but actually you can save yourself a right car crash at a point. Because as with us all horses, just like all people, we're all managing injury, aren't we? So we all know we've got a bit of a dodgy knee or a dodgy back, and we can't do this and we can't do that. But as we get older, it's only going to get more compounded. So the quicker we deal with it, the better in the long term. So from an equine wellness point, you can keep your horse so much happier by making these little changes. It's surprising what you can affect to the horse in the long term.
So your advice then is for whoever's listening to this, because obviously we're not all lucky enough to have this sort of Formula One pit stop approach to our horses, and having all the practitioners in one room. And quite frankly, I'm listening to this and I'm very tempted to bring my horse in next time we have one of these squad sessions and put her in front of you. But so your advice then for sort of normal horse owners then is to try and instigate that open dialogue then between the various practitioners that are treating these horses on daily, weekly, monthly basis.
I think if you take the horse out of it, and we call it a car, you want to make sure that your car gets serviced regularly. Do the basics really well. So the environment that the horse is in, look at all the things in there that could be done better or that might not be so good. And obviously cost is a huge implication. We haven't all got the huge overdraft or the huge funding and all that, but it doesn't have to be. If you're clever and you nip it in the bud, actually that's where it's cheaper because it doesn't go wrong. So spotting where there is a weakness, spotting where there's an asymmetry, spotting where you can make improvements and dealing with them early on is really key. But I think for your average leisure rider or privateer that just wants to do the bit of hunter trial and a bit of low-level eventing, making sure your shoeing cycles are short. I would definitely say no more than 5 or 6 weeks between shoeings. You can go longer, you absolutely can, but we all know that feet, because they grow that paper thickness of horn, after about 3.5 weeks, their foot is out of balance. And if you've got a barefoot horse, then that's fine, you haven't got shoes, but shoes will enforce the balance of a trim, so they'll maintain it for longer. So if your horse doesn't have shoes on, then it's really critical that you get those feet maintained much more regularly, so you're going to have shorter trimming in cycles. And I think getting the farrier and the vet and the physio even once a year over a Christmas mince pie, trying to get some sort of discussion between them all, just so that they're all on the same page. It might be that actually your farrier is your indicator that your horse has got sore suspensories much quicker than you losing marks in your test because the horse is struggling to hold its legs up when it's been nailed on or something like that. So from my perspective, the power of the group is so phenomenal, because when there's a problem, if I don't know what to do, then it could be my fault. But by bringing in Mark and bringing in the vet and bringing in the physio, and importantly the owner, we make a collective decision, don't we? So we're all happy with it.
Yeah, exactly. It's that holistic approach, isn't it? And the more eyes that we've got, the more sort of we can consider the problems, and it is about just if there is a bit of an issue or if there's a problem, whose door does it fall at? But it does involve everybody, doesn't it? If the foot balance is out, then the horse is going to be less stable. The saddle is going to be less stable. So the saddle fitter could be struggling trying to stabilise the saddle. Well, actually, it isn't necessarily a problem with the saddle. It's a problem with the shoeing cycle being left a little bit too long, or a foot balance that's not been corrected.
As you said, more eyes that you have, the more expertise, all looking at the same horse, going, well, why is that like that?
Yeah, and that communication between the equine practitioners, isn't it? Nowadays, we're more aware about the importance of that communication to help the horse, to help the client, and it is about talking. Yeah. We can't all be those experts on our own.
No.
We have to be able to have that ability to pick up the phone, have that conversation, and if another practitioner is concerned about maybe the fit of the saddle, that they pick the phone up and express their concerns, because maybe there's a really good answer for it.
Yeah.
And maybe, the saddle hasn't been looked at in the last 6 to 9 months. So it's a simple just...
and things change, don't they? Like suddenly things change, and if you're not aware of it, just by no one telling you any different, you keep going with what you're doing, but actually you might be getting further away from what's needed, and sometimes that's the flag, isn't it?
And I guess as well, a pair of fresh eyes sometimes spots the thing. The way when you're seeing a horse every single day, you can become a bit blind to some of the things that might be going wrong, those little tells, because you see them every day, whereas having a fresh set of eyes coming in can bring those problems to the fore.
Do you know what? It's really interesting. I think when we use the analogies of cars and bridges and buildings, we all understand suddenly then engineering and mechanics. But when we use a horse, we kind of normalise its poor conformation and make allowances for it. Well, it's always been like that. Well, if your car tyre points in, and it's always been like that, at some point it's going to be a problem. Or when you get a knocking noise, turning the radio up doesn't make it go away. At some point it's going to be a problem. But I think with horses, sometimes because we love them so much, we normalise that poor conformation. And actually, you're absolutely right, sometimes getting that professional in and getting the group in to go, this is my problem, do you think there might be anything? It might be that Mark turns up and goes, well, Ben, why is one shoe stuck out more than the other? And you go, is it? Oh, well, actually. Or, can you help me with this, And
I think owners with their horses, they're seeing them on a daily basis. They don't necessarily see the change. Which is why, as saddle fitters, we should be weight taping and templating, because if I haven't seen a horse for 3 or 4 months, I wouldn't necessarily just look at it and go, crikey, if it's changed a lot, obviously you do see that change, don't you? But documenting that information, the weight taping and the templating that we use is and a lot of owners don't realise how much the horse has changed. So there's your explanation. This is why the saddle isn't feeling quite right, or the horse is going a little bit short in front or behind, because there's the change on paper. That's how much the horse has changed, which is a positive change, possibly.
I suppose that's the thing. Weight tape isn't necessarily an accurate reflection of weight, but if you measure in the same place... There's
a difference.
And you wouldn't probably spot 30 kilos dropping off your horse until it gets to 40 kilos, and that's quite a bit. But a weight tape, you're right. Yeah. And we always say, like, I take pictures of my horse's feet, because sometimes being objective in your measurement is the way that you recognise it, whereas subjective, this is too much, too little, or I like that, but actually being objective. Whereas you're right, I take pictures and go, 6 months ago, they look like this, and look what they are now, and then the client that sees it every day goes, oh wow, I knew they were bad, but I didn't think they were that bad. But they've kind of seen the change. But the same with you measure all your horses, don't you, and template them, and it's really powerful when you refer back to, certainly on the programme, when we've had instability issues, you've been able to go, well, there was 5 mil more muscle across that scapula, or...
Yeah. Really important to document that change. And then owners are great then, because they see that change. They really sort of buy into that change, don't they? They see, if they can see it on paper, and actually a lot of the time it could be a positive change, it may be a negative change. If it's a negative change, then at least you can do something about it. The saddle, if the horse has changed in any way, then obviously the saddle will need rebalancing. Rebalance it, away you go.
How often would you rebalance the saddle?
We would advise 2 to 3, or the Society Master Saddlers advises 2 to 3 times a year for any horse, and obviously more regularly with the elite horses, it would be every 4 to 6 weeks perhaps.
And would you make an intervention? How often would you expect to have to reflock a saddle?
Almost every time. Wow. A slight rebalance. We spoke about the European Championships, and actually we covered the dressage and the para horses out there, and if we had 7 horses there, 3 of the saddles had to be rebalanced during the competition.
And is that fatigue or travel or what?
Yeah, both. Posture changes through travel, depending on how far we travel and how well they travel. And then obviously while they're there, depends on how hard they're working, as to how much they'll drop off or even gain. And it's mainly posture changes. So they'll throw the saddle out of balance with that posture. The thing that we found with the with the programme is obviously because we're seeing them on a pretty regular basis, hopefully we can keep the saddles fine-tuned. Well, then the riders start to detect it when it's not quite right. And of course, especially in a championship environment, that starts to affect their mindset, doesn't it? If they're not feeling quite as stable as they were before they left, then obviously that's when it's really important that it does fit, doesn't it?
I think that's probably the other thing. It's sort of very similar to farrier. The more consistent your horse's feet are, the less the horse notices any difference. So the other positive for having slightly shorter shoeing cycles is the feet never get that long to then have that change to become upright. I know there was discussion as to whether the most dangerous time for injury, foot-related, is the start of the shoeing cycle or at the end of the shoeing cycle. And certainly, from a competition point of view, everyone seems to train that bit harder just before the competition or at the competition before they go in. That's generally where injuries are done, aren't they? So being very consistent in your shoeing programme is key to making sure that the mechanics aren't tipped against you, and making sure that you're as efficient and the well-being is as best as you can be.
And there's certainly a connection with as you say, with the shoeing cycles and how we see the saddle stability or lack of stability towards the end of a shoeing cycle as those feet start to grow a little bit longer, or one foot grows a little bit more than the other, and that obviously goes up through to the thorax, to the rib cage, and therefore affects the balance and stability of the saddle as well. So everything is connected.
Well, this has been really, really interesting, guys. And I mean, quite frankly, we could keep talking about this all evening, but we also all want to go and have our dinner. So I think we'll leave it there, I think. And hopefully that's given people some food for thought and some things to think about on how they can, help their own horses at home. So thank you very much for listening, everyone. We've got lots more interesting stuff coming up for you at Equine Health Week. So make sure you are following us on social media, keeping an eye on the website, and thank you very much.